Hello, thank you very much for attending in this forum.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It is my pleasure to be here. Hello to all my friends in Korea. I'm very honored to have been chosen as the closing speaker of the University Innovation Forum. I hope it's been a very good forum for you, and I hope that you will have lots of questions for me, because that is what I enjoy the most, is really hearing from you and answering your questions. Now, to begin, I was asked to talk about educating digital natives, and as you heard, I created that term 20 years ago. But there's a question, and the question that I have for you is, are you expecting me to tell you all kinds of new techniques or tools or things that we can use past the boring old lectures to work with digital natives? And if you are, I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you. I'm sorry. I hope that's the right word. Because what I'm really going to talk about is the educating part, whether that is really what we need to do, and as it was just referred to as the learning part. I want to re-examine our past assumptions about that many of us share. And as I do with many things, I want to start zero-based with the young people of today and the world of the future in mind, and none necessarily of the baggage that we bring from the past. So I'm going to actually question our mission as educators and ask the question, is education, as we have conceived it up till now and as we practice it, is that actually necessary for digital natives, or do we need something new and different in its place? Not that the old will ever completely disappear, it certainly won't, but I'm going to argue that education, as we know it, is a once useful, but now largely outdated journey from the 20th century, and obviously before. And that the journey that we need to put ourselves on for the 21st century is empowerment. And I'll talk about what I mean by that, and I hope you will all think about joining me on this journey. Now, I understand this is a conference about innovation, and university innovation in particular. But when we think about innovation, we also have to think about a much broader context. So not just the university, but all of education, which involves the university and secondary and middle and primary. And even then, that has to fit into a context of growing up, which means that we start with parenting and through education to finding meaningful work and doing it. And that has to fit into the context of life in the future, which is going to be characterized, as I'm sure you know, to a large extent by change. So I want to talk about this journey from education to empowerment that I think we all will go on over the next several decades. And in order to do that, let's start back in the 20th century, when most of us were born and grew up. In that century, at that time, education was crucial. It was absolutely important in the world for many things, for getting ahead, for doing the kinds of work we wanted to do, and even for change. As Nelson Mandela reminded us, education is the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world. And he was right. In the 20th century. Now we have more powerful weapons that we can use to change the world, and we'll talk about those, empowerment and achievement. So if education was really crucial in the 20th century, everybody wanted to spread it as far as possible and to as many people as possible. And so we started to do that. And we made it an important international goal. The United Nations SDG number 4 is ensure inclusive and equitable quality education for all. And in some places, education became a local or even a national obsession, even though it was often harsh on the kids. Now, Korea, South Korea, where you are, rose to the top of Mount Pisa. And that was a terrific achievement, and I congratulate you for that. But as it evolved over this 20th century, it turned out that 20th century education doesn't meet the needs of all people, even though we were trying to put all people into it. And I know many of you have seen this report from the OECD, Lessons from PISA for Korea. I need to tell you that I don't agree with most of what OECD says about education and the future. I've participated, I've listened very much, but I have a different point of view. Education is not meeting everyone's needs, not because we don't do it as well as we should, but because it's too academic for many. Not everybody succeeds well in an academic environment. It's very highly competitive, as I know it is in your country. But most important, there's little or no real-world accomplishment or impact associated with the education that we have typically given in the last century. And that is a real problem. So what do we do over, say, the next decade? Well, we could do nothing, and that won't get us very much. But if we do something, I think we have 3 choices. We can either reform the education that we have, we can enhance the education that we have, or we can offer an alternative to the education that we have for those for whom it is better. Now, reforming it is what almost everybody in the world is trying to do right now. No matter where you go, you will see conferences on the future of learning or on the education of the future. And that's a noble effort that many are engaged in. The trouble with that is that there are huge barriers to reforming education. Most parents still want it for their kids. Adults believe in its power to help. We all know what it is because we went through it. Nobody really wants to experiment with their kid. It doesn't care about things like empowerment and accomplishment and impact. It's got a huge infrastructure that supports many, many people like us. PISA ranks and legitimizes it. It's very self-protective. It has huge antibodies to change. There's really no consensus on where we would go if we go. And what pressure there is for change, and there certainly is pressure for change, is really for icing, what I call icing, which is an acronym for incremental changes only. That's a lot of what we do these days. We take the old stale cake of education and we put new icing on it as incremental changes. Well, guess what? That doesn't make it any better to eat. So what's another option? Another option is to enhance it. And that's also what lots and lots of people are doing in the world, mostly by adding educational technology. And some people think, well, these are digital natives, they'll love technology, that'll make it all better. And others want to add other things like social emotional learning or play like Lego. The trouble with that is that it doesn't really fix our problems. Remember, our problems were academic learning and no accomplishing or impact. So if you add technology and do academic learning with technology, and you don't have accomplishment and impact, you haven't really changed very much at all. So the third option is to offer an alternative. And that alternative has started to emerge in the world. And I've seen it all over the world, including in your country. And that is to empower people via accomplishment, real world accomplishment. And as I can see it, and as I look around the world at every country, that seems to be the best option for a great many people. Perhaps not everybody, but certainly for a lot of the people who are not well served by the academic education that we now give. So here, if you should want to take a screenshot or a picture, is the whole picture. In the 20th century, education was crucial. It's not meeting everyone's needs. We have three choices, and our best option is empowerment. So let me start over. Now I'm going to talk about empowering digital natives. And that is a subject that is very near and dear to my heart, because I think it is what we really need and what they really need in order to have a successful future in the mid to late 21st century. So let me define a few terms. What do I mean by digital natives? Somebody put it very nicely recently. Digital natives are people born into the world when it was already digital. And that happened pretty much around the year 2000, around the turn of the millennium. Not exactly then, but in broad historical terms, that's when this great transition is going to be seen to have happened. Before then, we had the people who were born in a non-digital world who had to immigrate into the digital world. And after that, we had natives who were born in the digital world. So that's more or less a definition. Now, what defines the differences between the digital immigrants and the digital natives? It's not so much how much technology they know, because we all know that there are adults who know much more about technology and use it much more capably than many young people. It's rather that there are huge changing capabilities from the technology that are now available to young people starting at very early ages, in many instances in their pockets. But that's not enough, because along with that, there are changing beliefs. And we'll spend a bunch of time later on talking about what some of those beliefs are, because the capabilities I think you're all familiar with. Now let me talk about empowering and what that means to me, because it may not mean the same thing to you as it means to me. To me, empowering means actual accomplishment, getting something done in the real world. You are empowered when you have gotten something done in the real world. It's not potential empowerment. Some people think that empowerment comes from education. That's potential. Possibly you will accomplish something later on. But I talk about actual accomplishment that comes from doing continuous real-world projects all the time that we now call school. And those projects need to have measurable, positive impact on your world in some way. I call that MPI. So that's where I start in terms of what I think of as empowering. And the question is, of course, how do we go from educating to empowering these young people? And I think to a large extent that has to do with reframing how we think about many things. From an old frame, an old 20th century frame, if you will, to a new frame. And so now I'm going to talk about a number of reframings that I hope will be helpful to you as you think about going forward. Reframing means seeing things in a new way. It's not necessarily that the things themselves change, but our view of those things changes. It's like seeing, for example, a glass, the same glass, half full or half empty. Makes a big difference. So let's start by reframing who digital natives are. And the reframing that I think is very important here is from humans with new tools, which is the way many people think of them, to symbiotic hybrids. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we are fast moving towards becoming symbiotic human hybrids in the same way we are symbiotic with the bacteria on our skin and in our gut. All that bacteria, even the ones in our gut, are not on the inside, the blood-fed inside of our body. They're on the outside. But we can't live without them, and they can't live without us. We each help each other survive. That's a symbiotic relationship. And that's what I believe is happening with technology. So if you look at this screen, the column that's on the left in blue are the things that are pretty much already symbiotic, that a 21st century person wouldn't think of doing without the aid of technology, such as researching and calculating and translating, and even reading. I read everything now on my phone, and collaborating, and even things like agility and grit and learning. All of those things now are symbiotic with technology already. In the middle column are a set of things that are on their way to becoming symbiotic with technology. Debating, I don't know whether you've seen IBM's Project Debater, where a machine, Watson, debates a live person and almost wins in a formal debate. And many things like critical thinking and even art and music that we used to think of as very human are now becoming something that we do in conjunction with our machine parts. And finally, in the third column are a set of things, loving, dreaming, imagining, etc., that people have still tended to think of as purely human. But I think that even that group is going to change. For example, you can have a very loving relationship with somebody across the world, and you can have lots of them via technology. If you ever had a long distance relationship, that's what happens. So all of these things that used to be uniquely biological, uniquely human in that sense, are really changing as we all become symbiotic hybrids. Now, the second reframing is where the digital natives live. Because up till now, as we all know, there was only really one place to live, which was on Earth physically, but we also lived in our imaginations. And we know that everything that is man-made or human-made on Earth started in the imagination of some person. But that was all there was. Now we have a new world. Now we have the Earth and we have the imagination, but we also have something called the cloud. And what's really interesting is that the Earth and the cloud for this new generation of digital natives will be equal. One will not be better than the other. One will be good for some things and the other will be better for other things. And imagination really has now two big outlets. So many things that occurred in young people's imaginations or that occur, they can bring to fruition in the cloud when they couldn't do it necessarily on Earth. Now, what are the goals? What should the goals be for these digital natives? Well, one of the things that we have done up till now is we've given young people the goal of achieving. Go to the top, get to the best university that you can, and that's your goal. Get the best grades you can and go as far as you can in the hierarchy. And if you listen to the OECD, they're now adding to that the idea of well-being, which is really happiness. And that's another goal, possibly. But I think there's a different set of goals that the digital natives already have and that they want to have. And those goals are accomplishing, getting things done, sometimes they call it changing the world, and realizing their dreams. And that's something we couldn't do before, but we can do now. So that a far better goal for 21st century kids is this. I use FAR as an acronym because they need to find their new beliefs and unique value and new connections and new 21st century powers, because they don't know those until they find them. They need to do that in order to apply them to accomplishing with positive impact and to meaningful work that creates and adds value all their lives to humanity. And in doing that, they will realize their positive dreams for themselves, for their families, and for the world. And I think that's a great goal for these kids to have. Now, what do they need to think about in the future and to reach these goals? Well, in the past, we lived in this world that was a world of generational replacement. Every generation, we needed new doctors, new lawyers, new workers, new everything, because we were people who had finite lifetimes. And so the question that we would ask when we met a young person, and still do, is what do you want to be when you grow up? And almost every adult asks that to almost every kid. And the kids don't always know, but now they're in a context where that's not what matters anymore. The right answer for those young people is, I want to invent myself. I want to invent a role for myself that makes sense for me, for what I love, for my strengths, for my capabilities, and for my dreams. And in order for us to do that, we have to have a very different system that doesn't start with the things, the replacements that we're going to have to produce, which is what we do today, but starts with each of those individuals. And it turns out that there are now between 2 billion and 3 billion young people in the world. Each one has particular dreams and particular things they care about. I've never met a kid without dreams, if you probe a little. And our goal should be to help them realize their dreams and fix the problems that they care about. In order to do that, the process that is coming is real world projects and accomplishments. And that will help them do those two things. And that process is supported by people and teams and empowering beliefs and self-understanding, what I call diamond skills that we'll talk about in a minute, and the symbiosis with technology that we just talked about. So what's a good way to reframe the future for these young people and for all of us? We come from a world where experience was very valuable. Why? Because things didn't change very much. They would be more or less the same, and if you had experience and you'd seen things before, you could add a lot of value. Where we're moving is to a new frontier. And in a new frontier, experience is not as valuable. What's valuable is exploration, a willingness to explore. So when you're in that old world of the clouds, you need a lot of experience to figure out what to do and where to go. But in that new frontier of the wild blue yonder, as they say, you need to be ready to explore. That's a different set of needs that the young people have. And what's universal? Because as we tried to spread this education around the world, we assumed that it would be useful for every person. And we discovered that while it certainly benefited many of us, it was not as useful for every person. It was not universal. Academic success was not something every person is capable of achieving. So we can ask, what is every person in the world capable of achieving? And that, my answer is real world accomplishment. Only some people can earn degrees, and especially the higher you go and the more prestigious you get, the smaller number. But everybody in the world can set themselves objectives and reach them. And if they're smart, they will set objectives that they know they can reach, and then as their guides, as their, if you will, their teachers, we need to help them stretch and find new goals that will help them grow. So I think about what we call these digital natives. Now, one time we can just call them digital natives, and this may be a problem with language, and I don't know, the translator, thank you very much, translator, can help us. In English, we call them children. We call them kids. We call them students. We call them learners. All of those terms, in a sense, put them down. They put the young people on a level below the adults. That's us. And that is something that we have done to young people for a very, very long time. I think it's time to reframe our young people as people. People who happen to be young and who are worth exactly the same as the people who happen to be older. And in fact, in many instances, especially with the new technologies, may have better ideas, more interesting ideas than some of the people who have lots of real world experience, which is what distinguishes the older people. So we start off with parenting, we go to school, and then we spend most of our lives at something called work. And what is that? How is that going to be reframed in the mid to late 21st century? I think we need to reframe it as adding unique value. That every single one of the 2 to 3 billion young people in the world has a unique way that he or she can add value to the world, and that's something that we need to help them find. It turns out that education, for all the good it does, doesn't do a very good job of helping people understand exactly what they are good at, what they really love to do, how they can add unique value, how to address the problems that they particularly uniquely care about, and how to put those things together in order to build a good life. Right now we have a track that they go through, and that gets them to a degree, and then they have to figure out how they're going to have a good life and add value to the world. Excuse me. How does the work get done? That's changing as well. That needs a reframe as well, because we have thought of the world in terms of jobs. What job do you want? What job will you have? What job are you getting ready for by getting your education? Well, the idea of jobs, especially jobs for life, is really going through big changes. And this is happening terrifically in the business world. It's happening everywhere. And it's changing more to projects. Some call this a gig economy, and that's a piece of it. It's very much like the movie business, where to make a movie, you have to assemble a team of people, each one of whom has very specific skills. You've got to get a good team together. They hopefully make a good movie, and then they disperse and wait for the next project. So the whole world is moving to projects, and I think it's very important that we, whether we're in the universities or the secondary or even the primary school, start moving to real world projects. Now, importantly, I don't mean what's sometimes called PBL, project-based learning. That's a term, when I first went to Singapore, they all said, oh, we do PBL. I don't mean that, because that really is just another pedagogy for teaching the old curriculum. What I mean is actual accomplishment, real world, not potential, but really applied accomplishment. I mean projects done by kids at all levels, or people who happen to be young at all levels, with measurable positive impact on their world. Now, of course, in order to do this, you do need skills. And up till now, we've looked at skills in a number of ways. Basic skills that all kids needed to have, hard skills, soft skills, and more recently, people have been coming out with lists of 21st century skills, so-called. I think there are really only two kinds of skills. There are skills that are very task-specific, that you have to know how to do something in order to perform a particular task. And then, what's more important is that there are a whole load of skills that are rather transferable lifetime capabilities that you build up over a lifetime. And those are so important, I call them diamond skills. And I divide these diamond skills into 4 categories: effective thinking skills, effective action skills, effective relationship skills, and effective accomplishment skills. And as you can see, there are so many of them, and they each take a lifetime, so long to develop, that no single person has all of them. Everybody is unique in their combination of these skills and in their mix. And it's the combination applied to measurable positive impact and value that leads to true innovation. So you can take a picture of this as well. Now, we are used to thinking about things in terms of curricula. That's what academia does. It offers curricula, which for most people is sequential courses. What's the sequence of courses, the scope and sequence, as many people say, of the courses that we're going to offer? I think that's changing to sequential projects, that people will do projects over and over again, a unique set of projects for each person, which effectively makes each person having his or her own curriculum. And how do we assess that curriculum? Well, the way we've done it in the past is essentially through ranking. We would assign numbers or grades or credits to everybody, and then we would rank them in order. Well, it turns out with projects, there's a much better way, which I call before and after. And what do I mean? Well, the old ranking way is really destructive. And you have seen this in Korea. I've seen this in Palo Alto. Kids who were really upset with their grades threw themselves under trains. Ranking really kills. But the before and after is much better, because what people can do is they can point to something in the world, it can be anything, and say, see that? Before it was bad, or it didn't even exist. And now, because of what I and my team did, it's much better. So that leads to pride and self-confidence and self-esteem for everybody. Now we come to beliefs. And beliefs are incredibly important, and I've been thinking about beliefs very, very much. 20th century beliefs, 21st century beliefs, because I believe that beliefs are changing generationally in many key areas of life. And it's not just me. I've discussed this at length with cultural anthropologists. And we see generational belief change in a huge number of areas. And here's a list. And you can think about whether you and your students or you and your own children have different beliefs in these different areas, whether it's technology or privacy or property or personal relationships. I think this is changing around the world, not at the same speed everywhere, but we're seeing generational change that we've never seen before at this scale. And I think we are starting to see a generational beliefs divide that's really important. In fact, I would say it's more important than what people call the digital divide, with some people having technology and others not, because you can give people technology. But belief change is harder, and belief change is actually what creates a different future. So let me just show you a little bit about this beliefs divide. And this is not all of it, but this is some of it, particularly with regard to education. Many people, again, not everybody, but many people from the 20th century who were brought up like I was, believe that kids can't accomplish much, that learning for years and years has to come first, that technology is just a tool, you don't need it, you can take it away, that in-person is much better, that kids need skills and knowledge from us with experience, that individual work is crucial, you don't plagiarize, you don't copy, and that education as we do it is important and necessary. Those are what I call old beliefs. And they're not particularly empowering to kids. But there's a new set of beliefs emerging in the kids, which says we can do these things, even though we happen to be younger. That we need to get out there and do them, that accomplishing comes first. That's how you discover what you're good at and what you want to do. And then if you need to fill in some holes, that's the time to do it. Technology is a symbiotic part of us. You can't just take away our phone, because if you do, it's like cutting off a body part. The earth and the cloud are equal, or certainly on their way to becoming equal, that kids need empowerment and coaching from the adults, that teamwork and collaboration are crucial, and that while preparing for the future, of course, is needed, 20th century education may no longer be the best way. And I've put together some of the beliefs that I think future people need in order to succeed in the mid to late 21st century. And it's a free online book, and here's the URL that you can see. I'm going to show you some of the pages from that book. I have a unique set of dreams, passions, strengths, and capabilities that no other human has. I can understand my uniqueness and apply it to bettering my world in my own way. I have the power to create positive change as an individual and even more powerfully in teams. As you may know, that's Greta Thunberg when she was starting, and she's just getting into this idea of having power and bringing the whole world of young people together in order to show that power and use that power. I can and will take my dreams as seriously as I want to. Don't let anybody tell you you shouldn't have them. Take them seriously, because now we're in a time when you can realize them. My goal is to become a good, effective, world-improving person, doing the most good and the least harm I can. My best self combines what I care about most, what I'm best at, and what I love to do. And when you bring all these three things together, you get something very special. And I will make my human and machine components work together well to solve problems. That's the symbiosis that we talked about earlier. So you can see all of those, and there are many more pages. Now I want to talk about a reframe that may be more controversial, which is the reframe of culture. Because we live in a time, the very first time, when young people are becoming connected horizontally all over the planet. And the idea that we've had up till now of very local cultures that were very strongly held is also meeting the idea of a global culture. Everyone wears jeans. And we really need to think this through as we go forward. Should empowerment be global? Are we becoming a global species? We need to think about this. Or should it remain more local? How much should we put our own local beliefs as Koreans or as Americans or as anyone else into our kids? Do we want to be more national? Do we want them to be more global in their outlook? And that brings me to another philosophical question, which I want to end this portion with, which is reframing humanity. And how do we see humanity? Because up till now and up through the 20th century, humans have gotten better and better and better, and they've really, in a sense, taken over the planet. They've gotten to the top. That was the reframe. Some people call it humanism. I think that we really need to think about this, and that the young people really need to think about this, because it's been all about growth. We started as a little dot in Africa. We came to dominate the planet. And now one vision that I've had of people and humans is a great amoeba. All we want to do is grow. Now we're putting out pseudopods to the space and off the earth. And growth has been this enormous goal for everybody. Well, people are starting to question whether that is, in fact, the best goal for humanity. And I don't have the answer, but I really think that we need to think about where humanity is going. So let me now come back to Earth and talk about the empowerment alternative for the 21st century. Remember, you could reform, you could enhance, or you could offer an alternative. And we have an alternative emerging in the world called the empowerment alternative. As we move into this mid to late 21st century, a great many people are worried about artificial intelligence and automation and machines taking people's jobs, taking over. And how do we look at that? What's the best way to reframe that? Well, here's what I think. I think that even with all the artificial intelligence and automation of the new century, whatever we come up with, we are not going to run out of a number of things. We're not going to run out of dreams to realize. We're not going to run out of problems to fix. We're not going to run out of people who need help, and we're not going to run out of people who want to help make things better. Now, the thing about education is that it doesn't really address these things and these people. But empowerment addresses all of them. And let me just contrast a little bit what academic schools offer versus what this new thing that we're calling for the moment empowerment hubs offer. Academic schools are basically a 20th century vision of what was needed back then. They focus on academic learning. They're mostly classes and courses with some projects perhaps. We measure learning progress. We focus on individual work. We make technology an optional, a frequently used but optional tool. We create mastery certification to be used later, and maybe some potential empowerment. But the empowerment hub alternative is more of a 21st century vision of what we now need. We focus on accomplishment with impact, measurable positive impact. It's mostly projects, classes or courses or information only when you need it to get something done. What we measure is impact, and we focus on teams, networking, and collaboration. Technology is a symbiotic part of each person and each team and what we do. We do continuous real-world accomplishment, not in the future, but now, every day. And we have actual applied empowerment. So education, as we do it today, does not particularly prepare kids for the mid to late 21st century. It does indirectly in the old sense, but empowerment does it really directly. It gets the kids ready to get things done because they will have had experience doing that. So if we really want to prepare our 2 to 3 billion kids for their 21st century lives, we will start creating empowerment hubs as an alternative, not necessarily to replace all schools or all academic education, but as an alternative for 21st century kids as soon as we can, so that kids and parents have an alternative to offer. Now, it's interesting that every country, including this one, of course, because you're the sponsor, has a Ministry of Education. But as far as I know, no country, no place has a Ministry of Empowerment. So I and some of my colleagues decided to start one. We formed the Global Ministry of empowerment, accomplishment, and impact, supporting empowerment hubs worldwide. And I would recommend that you have a local ministry of empowerment, accomplishment, and impact. That would be something that would probably be very useful for your country. You can find us at ministry-of-eai.org. And one thing that I'll point out about empowerment hubs and empowerment in general, it can work at all levels. So you can do it with primary school kids, secondary school kids, and if you do it by the time they get to university, they will be so empowered that they will be doing things that really blow us all away compared to the past. Already they're starting to do that, but with full preparation, it's amazing, and we will all be surprised at what they can do. We can do this in multiple ways. Some people start after school. Some people start within an existing school or university. And some people do it as a replacement. So there's lots of models of how to do empowerment and empowerment hubs. And a lot of people think that it's easy for the older kids. Okay, of course, once they're better, once they're older, and once they have more knowledge, they can do projects and they can be empowered in ways. And that's, you can each think about something in your classes or your school or your courses that older kids can do. But it actually starts with the younger kids. And the younger they are and the younger they start, the better it's going to be for the future. So let me leave you with this very short video of some very young kids in Spain and the project that they did. Their problem was that they couldn't reach the garbage cans. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where empowerment needs to start. And just think of it, if it does start then, what it will be by the time these young people get to the university. So if you want to think about or start or build an empowerment hub, EAI will help you. We are there to help you design, connect with other people, share ideas, find resources and people. We're not actually selling any product. I'm not here to sell products. I'm here to share ideas. And I've written 10 books. 2 of them are now just coming out. And I hope that they will be ideas, full of ideas that will inspire you. I'm very proud that 2 of my books have been translated into Korean, and I hope many more will be. Now, finally, a lot of people ask me, well, what are the ideas? What are the projects that young people have done? And there are thousands of them, and they've been done all over the world. And if I tell you about specific ones, the danger is you'll say, oh, we can do that, and we can copy that, and we can do that. You can find these projects in databases at btwdatabase.org, at dfcworld.com, all over the web. But the ones that count are the ones that are in the kids' heads. And that's what you've got to work on. Excuse me. So to conclude, the 20th century was very much the education century. And here we all are in education, very proud of what we've done. I understand, I heard it said that South Korea has more PhDs per capita than any other country on earth. But for the digital natives and for humanity in general to move forward into the mid to late 21st century and beyond, that 21st century will need to be, I believe, the empowerment century. And that is going to be up to us. So please don't be left behind, but empower them now. I salute you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. It will be helpful for the Korean who are related to the university and college. Thank you very much once again. 네, 정말 이 대학 관계자들에게 도움이 되는 유익한 말씀으로 이렇게 함께 해주셨는데요. 오늘 줌으로 함께하고 계시는 분들이 계셔서 박사님께 좀 여쭤볼까 합니다. 줌으로 함께해 주시는 분들께서 강연을 해주시는 동안 질문을 몇 가지 주셨는데요. 답변을 좀 부탁드리겠습니다. 자, 그러면 먼저 오늘 줌으로 함께하고 계시는 장유진님부터 만나뵐까요? 안녕하세요. 네, 장유진님 안녕하세요. 지금 질문을 미리 주셨는데요. 네, 제 목소리 들리시나요, 유진 씨?
네네.
네네네. 얼굴을 보여주셔도 좋을 것 같아요. 네, 소개 좀 부탁드리고 질문을 좀 해주시겠어요?
네, 저는 경인교육대학교 기획처에서 근무하고 있는 장유진입니다.
네, 질문 주시지요. 연결돼 있습니다.
네, 제 질문은 저희 디지털 네이티브 세대에서 이제 학습하고 있는 학습자들과 이제 아날로그 세대를 거쳐온 교육자들의 격차를 줄여서 교육할 수 있는 방안이 어떤 것이 있는지입니다.
I think that what's important is that the young people, call them digital natives, get to accomplish as early and as much as possible. It is not very comfortable or even very useful for them to sit in seats in classrooms. I know I have a 16-year-old son and he really hates that. But every time he gets to do something, a project that he has chosen, not that somebody gave him, but that he has chosen related to something that he cares about, then all his energy and effort goes into that. So my recommendation to people who are now teaching, whether it's in universities or schools anywhere, is to figure out, to encourage your students to come up with projects related to what you're doing, not that you come up with, but that they care about. Ask them what problems they see, ask them what they want to fix, ask them their dreams, and then let them proceed and you guide them and help them do it in a good way.
Thank you very much for your response. 자기 주도 학습 얘기를 저희 한국에서도 많이 하고 있는데 디지털 네이티브 세대 이 학습자가 조금 더 흥미를 갖고 교육을 받기 위해서는 자기주도 학습을 할 수 있도록 우리 아날로그 세대 교육자들이 좀 도와줬으면 좋겠다 이런 말씀을 해주셨습니다. 고맙습니다. 그리고 박사님 또 한 가지 질문이 더 있는데요. 줌으로 주셨습니다. 줌 참가자가 주셨습니다. 송문수님께서 질문을 주셨는데요. 송문수님, 네, 연결이 돼 있죠? 안녕하세요.
네,
네,
네, 안녕하세요.
반갑습니다. 소개 좀 부탁드리고 질문 직접 주시죠.
예, 안녕하세요. 저는 아주대학교에 근무하는 송문수라고 합니다. 예, 질문을 바로 드리도록 하겠습니다. 네, 잘 들리시나요?
네, 잘 들립니다. 질문 주시죠.
네, 알겠습니다. 네, 제 질문은 디지털 네이티브가 되기 위한 중요한 세 가지 요인 혹은 세 가지 특성을 알려주시면 감사하겠습니다. What is the essential element to become the digital native? Please share us the three typical example. Yeah, thank you.
There's really only one element by definition, and that's to be born in the 21st century in the digital world. At that point, you are a native. If you are not, you can learn to work with the tools of the digital natives of the times, and those things are important to do. I think possibly the most important thing to do is really to listen to young people as the equals of older people who come from a new world and try to figure out new solutions. There are not, I can't say three things that you have to have. I think that it's really a combination of putting the old world and the new world together with mutual respect.
Thank you very much for your answer. 디지털 네이티브가 사용하는 툴을 좀 익히고 또 디지털 네이티브 세대의 말에 경청하면서 함께 솔루션을 만들어 가라. 조언의 말씀 감사드리겠습니다. 그리고 또 다른 질문자가 함께 줌으로 연결이 돼 있습니다. 홍광택님 나와 계시죠? 안녕하세요.
네, 안녕하세요.
네, 소개 좀 부탁드리고 질문 전달해 주실까요?
네, 안녕하세요. 전 전북대에 근무하고 있는 홍광택이라고 합니다. 제가 드리고 싶은 질문은 디지털 네이티브를 위해서 대학이 궁극적으로 나아가야 할 방향이 무엇인지 질문 드리겠습니다.
I think that's a very interesting question. I think that as people get better and better at doing the kinds of projects that affect the real world, the university and the people that it gathers as its instructors and as its faculty should be able to help them go further. And an example that I have is, I know in the United States, I spoke with a Nobel Prize winning professor at one university, and he said to me, all I have my students do is projects. And that's very much what Einstein said. I just create an atmosphere in which they can do projects, and I guide them. And that's really in a time when the past is not only from the past, and it may be building blocks, but it's available to everybody. The most important thing that we need to do is be focusing on getting new things done for the future. It's not, and I heard this a couple of times, it's not going to be just about learning. Learning is a means to an end. We learn in order to accomplish, so that the goal, whether you're at the university or at any other school, the goal needs to be accomplishment, not learning. What we want to measure is accomplishment, not learning. We can't master all the tools in advance because we're still learning to use these tools. So it's about invention. And I hope, and it's very nice that this is a conference about innovation, I hope that the universities in the future will be a place where invention and innovation get done.
네, 고맙습니다. 홍광택님, 예, 답변 함께 받으셨는데요. 지금 현재 온라인으로도 질문이 좀 많이 올라오고 있어서 박사님께서 디지털 네이티브 관련된 답변을 주셨으니까 잠시 온라인에 올라온 질문 연결을 해서 좀 드리겠습니다. 제가 대신 읽어드리겠습니다. 그렇다면 디지털 네이티브에게 학교라는 교육기관이 과연 필요할까요? 만약에 필요하다면 어떤 점에서 필요하다고 생각하시나요? 이런 질문이 올라와 있거든요.
I think that people come in a number of varieties. And there are people for whom the school, the traditional school where you learn and you learn things and you get knowledge like academia does, is useful. But for most people and most digital natives, I think that it needs to be something a little bit different. That's why I talk about empowerment hubs as an alternative. Now, they may still be a place where kids go, or they may be virtual, but very different things will happen. So instead of going to a place where you sit in classes and learn things and take tests and get ranked, it's a place where you go and you do projects and you form teams and you go outside and you solve real world problems and you realize things that are in your mind. And when I was last in Korea, I saw a school that was very much like that. And they still called it a school, but in fact, it was much more of an empowerment hub.
그렇군요. 역량 강화 관련된 얘기를 한 번 더 언급해 주셨는데 지금 홈페이지에 대학교 2학년생이 질문을 주셨어요. 여러 가지 역량 강화 방법을 말씀 주셨는데 저는 대학생 2학년입니다. 대학교 2학년이 역량 강화를 위해서 가장 먼저 해야 하는 것은 무엇일까요? 이런 질문을 주셨고 좋은 강연 감사합니다 라는 메시지도 남겨주셨습니다. 구체적으로 학년별로 다를 수 있을지는 모르겠는데 답변을 좀 부탁드릴까요?
Yes. It's a very interesting question for the people who are currently in school and are not necessarily happy with what they have to go through in order to succeed in life and society by getting the grades and getting the degrees that they need. How do they become empowered? Well, the way to do that is to figure out how to do projects, one at a time perhaps, that you really care about. So I would recommend that you think about what you love, what problems you care about, what you love to do, and how you can put that together to address something in the world. Some people are interested in the climate and in saving the world in that way. Other people are concerned with bullying. Other people are concerned with racism. Other people are concerned with any number of things. You need to figure out what you're concerned with and about, and then find a solution. Build a team, hopefully, and find a solution. As one example, there was a young girl in the US, I think she was 11 at the time, and her name is Gitanjali Rao. And she saw that in a place called Flint, Michigan, a city in the United States, they had a real problem with lead in the drinking water. And for whatever reason, she said, that's a problem that I care about. And so she got together with people and with other scientists and things, and she created a way to measure the lead using a cell phone and a simple tool that didn't exist. And that is enormously helpful to that place. So what you really want to do as a student or as a young person or as a person who happens to be young is ask yourself, how can I help the world I live in and do it in a way that I really get excited about? And the answer to that will be different for everybody, but when you find it, I guarantee you'll have a lot more fun.
고맙습니다. 아마 미래가 아직은 불확실한 우리 학생들에게 정말 큰 도움이 되는 조언이 아니었나 싶습니다. 그렇다면 조금 전에 박사님께서 이 디지털 네이티브에게는 다른 것이 필요하다 이런 말씀도 해주셨는데 지금 이런 질문이 들어와 있습니다. 그러면 디지털 네이티브에게 결핍되어 있는 것이 무엇이라 생각되십니까? 그리고 결핍된 게 있다면 어떻게 보완해야 할까요? 이런 질문이 들어와 있는데요.
It depends on each individual. It really, I don't know that as a group they are missing a whole lot. We adults tend to think of the past as something enormous that we have to give our kids. They have to know what happened. They have to know about our culture. They have to know all these things. And many of them want to, and many of them will, and that's great. But they're not missing it if they don't get it. As long as they get something that they need that makes them contribute and add value to the world that they live in. I don't think young people are missing an enormous amount.
고맙습니다. 이제 마지막 질문이 되겠습니다. 줌으로 참가하고 계시는 참가자께서 질문을 주셨는데요. 연결해 볼까요? 김은옥님 연결돼 있죠?
네,
안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. 소개 좀 부탁드리고 인사도 나누시고 질문 주실까요?
네, 안녕하세요. 호원대학교 김은옥이라고 합니다. 제가 궁금한 점은 이제 코로나19로 교육 방법이나 내용이 이제 급격하게 디지털화되어 있습니다. 그래서 이미 이제 디지털 네이티브들은 잘 적응을 했지만 그리고 또 이런 방법들이 장점도 있는데 예전에 많은 교육학자들이 우려했던 그런 문제점들이 대두되고 있습니다. 근데 이런 문제를 해결하기 위한 방법이나 아니면 교육 관계자들이 가져야 할 리프레이밍이 무엇인지 답변을 듣고 싶습니다.
For me, the problem comes with the focus only on learning. Whether it's virtual or in person, that's what we are focused on. Now, whether the different ways that you can do learning may or may not matter. What a lot of people around the world found, a lot of parents found, is that what their kids were doing in school once they saw it on the Zoom screen was not very interesting, not very useful. And so there started to be a big revolt even among some parents to say, why are the kids doing that? So I don't think it matters really much whether you do it in person or whether you do it through technology. In fact, for my son and for many people, they stopped liking parts of technology as much as they did because it was associated with too much school and learning, and that made it less interesting to them. I think that's a terrible result. So I think that we have to get away from the idea of saying all we want our kids to do is learn and start saying what we really want our kids to do is what they're already doing on their own, which is accomplish.
Thank you very much. 답변하시는 동안 지금 그 아이를 키우는 부모님께서 질문을 주셔서 마지막 질문으로 한 가지만 더 부탁을 드리겠습니다. 제가 대신 질문을 읽어드리겠습니다. 디지털 네이티브 세대 아이를 키우고 있는 부모입니다. 디지털 미디어와 기기들에 대한 아이들의 노출에 대한 고민이 많습니다. 디지털 네이티브에게는 무한정 디지털 디바이스에 대해서 본인이 원하는 만큼 기회를 줘야 하는 건지 아니면 제한을 하는 것이 맞을지 궁금하고요. 프렌스키 님께서는 아이들을 이 부분에서 어떻게 케어하시는지 말씀 부탁드립니다. 이렇게 주셨네요.
Thank you for asking. It's not an easy question for any parent. And it's a time when things are changing dramatically. What I think is that it's very important that as natives of this technology, the kids get to use and experiment with and find out about these technologies as much as possible. Because we don't know all the ways that we can use this. Just because there's something, say, that's virtual reality, how is that going to be used or integrated? It's the young people who are going to figure that out. So I encourage my son to use the technology as much as possible, but I also know that he lives in a somewhat traditional world where the grades and the school that he does is going to be important for at least a part of his life. So I make sure that he gets that done as well. And what he really loves, and since you asked, I'm proud to talk about this, my son, who is 16 years old, wants to be a pilot. And so he is now taking flying lessons. And if you bring up anything that has to do with flying to him, he will be incredibly interested. If you bring up something that has to do with school, he really won't care.
고맙습니다. 답변 감사드리겠고요. 아울러서 아드님의 꿈도 이뤄가기를 저도 함께 기도하겠습니다. 오늘 긴 시간 정말 함께 해주셨는데요. 말씀도 감사드리고 또 답변도 고맙습니다. 다음에는 직접 만나뵐 수 있기를 기대하겠습니다. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Pleasure. I'm very happy to have been able to dialogue with you. Thank you.
고맙습니다. 어느새 이렇게 1시간 30분이 금방 흘러갔습니다. 다양한 말씀을 함께 나눠주셨는데요. 오늘 나와주신 마크 프렌스키 설립자님 감사드리겠고요. 마지막으로 저희 이렇게 함께 만나보셨는데 직접 참여하신 소감이 어떠신지 좀 여쭤볼까요?
I love the fact that there were questions from different kinds of people. From a parent, from a student, from educators, because we all have to work together at this. We are all moving into what I call a new frontier, and nobody has the right answers. We are going to all figure it out. We are all here. It's our job to figure it out together. And so I'm very, very happy that all these kinds of people are here, that we're working together. I salute the people in South Korea for doing such a good job with technology, with so many things, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you very much once again for sharing with us your feeling and attending in this forum despite the time difference. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.